Marcus Reed's diner was days away from being seized. Bills piled high, racist neighbors mocked him openly, and some people said a black man never belonged on Maple Street in the first place. But still, he kept feeding strangers who walked through his door. One night, he gave his very last plate of food to a trembling, homeless man, while customers whispered that his kindness and people like him were the reason he was going broke. But when officers arrived to shut his diner down, 3 black SUVs pulled up outside, and the same man everyone thought was a nobody stepped out dressed in a suit that made the whole street go silent. Before we go any further, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories that remind us that kindness, courage, and integrity still matter. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who believes that doing the right thing is always worth it. Now, let's begin. Marcus Reed's diner looked like a place the world had almost forgotten. The old neon sign hanging above the entrance buzzed weakly against the evening drizzle. Rainwater slid down the windows, blurring the glowing red letters that spelled out Reed's Family Diner. The paint on the building had faded years ago, and the cracked parking lot carried the scars of countless winters. Inside, the smell of fried onions, fresh coffee, and homemade biscuits filled the air. The booths were covered in worn red vinyl, and the soft hum of an old refrigerator echoed from the kitchen. A clock above the counter ticked loudly in the silence. Business hadn't been good for a long time. Most evenings, only a handful of customers came in. And lately, even fewer people seemed willing to sit down and eat there. Not because the food wasn't good, not because the service was bad, but because Marcus Reed was a black man running one of the few businesses left on Maple Street. Some people never accepted that. Marcus stood behind the counter, wiping the same spot over and over with an old rag that had long since lost its color. He wasn't cleaning anymore. He was thinking. Because hidden inside the office drawer behind him was a stack of unpaid bills he hadn't been brave enough to look at for 2 days. People said Marcus was too generous for his own good. Maybe they were right. Every evening, somebody hungry found their way to his diner. Sometimes it was an elderly woman living on Social Security. Sometimes it was a tired single mother with children she couldn't afford to feed. Sometimes it was a homeless veteran carrying memories heavier than his backpack. Marcus never asked questions. He simply cooked. If I can make food, then nobody around me should go to sleep hungry. That was something his late mother used to say, and Marcus had never forgotten it. Across the room, 2 regular customers sat in a booth near the window. Neither of them liked Marcus. Susan Whittaker crossed her arms as she watched him. "I still don't understand why people support this place," she muttered. Her friend Corinne Dawson shrugged. "Because they feel sorry for him." Susan shook her head. "My father always said businesses around here used to be different. This street changed the day people started lowering their standards." Corinne smirked. "You know exactly what he meant." Marcus heard every word. He always did, but he never answered, because arguing with hate only made hate louder. Instead, he quietly refilled their coffee cups and walked away. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. The bell above the entrance jingled. Everyone turned. A man stepped inside. He was thin, soaked. His coat hung loosely from his body like it belonged to someone else. His beard was uneven. His shoes were falling apart, and his hands trembled from the cold. The entire diner became quiet. Susan frowned immediately. "Oh, great," she whispered loudly. "Another one?" Corinne rolled her eyes. "First we let anyone own businesses here, and now he invites every homeless person off the street." Marcus ignored them. He grabbed a towel and walked toward the stranger. "Sir," he said gently, "you look freezing." The man lowered his eyes but didn't answer. Marcus smiled kindly. "Come on, sit down, brother. You're safe here." The stranger slowly shuffled toward the corner booth. Water dripped from his coat onto the floor. He looked exhausted, not just tired, broken. Marcus poured a mug of hot coffee and placed it carefully in front of him. Then he disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, he returned with a large bowl of chicken soup, fresh bread, and a slice of apple pie. The stranger stared at the food. His eyes widened slightly, as though he couldn't remember the last time someone had treated him like a human being. "You don't have to pay," Marcus said softly. "Just eat." The man's hands shook as he picked up the spoon. From the booth by the window, Susan laughed. See, that's exactly why he's broke, Karen snorted. Always trying to save the world. Another voice nearby added, maybe if he worried more about making money than feeding strangers, he wouldn't be losing this place. Marcus's jaw tightened. But he didn't turn around, he didn't defend himself. There was no point. Instead, he noticed something strange. The homeless man's eyes, they weren't empty, they were watching him, carefully. Studying him, almost as if he was seeing more than everyone else in that room. Marcus placed 2 pain relievers beside the coffee. You look like you've had a rough few days. Still, the man said nothing, but something changed in his expression, something soft, something grateful. Outside, thunder rolled across Riverside, Georgia. Rain began falling harder. And Marcus Reed had no idea that the quiet stranger sitting in booth number 7 had just stepped into his life for a reason bigger than anything he could possibly imagine. The next morning, Marcus stood behind the counter pouring fresh coffee into a chipped mug, while trying not to think about the stack of unpaid invoices in his office drawer. The smell of bacon and biscuits still filled the room, but these days that comforting aroma seemed unable to hide the growing weight on his shoulders. Business had become slower with every passing month. People in Riverside had stopped coming, not because the food had changed, but because some simply couldn't accept seeing a black man running one of the oldest diners on Maple Street. They never said it openly in front of outsiders, but in quiet conversations and whispered remarks, they made their feelings painfully clear. Marcus had learned long ago that hatred didn't always shout. Sometimes it smiled, sometimes it whispered, and sometimes it sat at one of your tables pretending everything was normal. Near the front window, Susan Whittaker sat with her usual group. You know what this street used to look like 20 years ago? She asked with a bitter smile. Back when businesses were owned by people who actually belonged here, Karen smirked. Things sure have changed. Another woman shook her head. I heard his bank is getting ready to take this place away. Honestly, I'm surprised it took this long. Susan laughed softly. Maybe he should have spent less time feeding strangers and more time acting like a businessman. Marcus heard every word, but he simply wiped down the counter and pretended not to notice. Fighting with people like them never changed anything. It only gave them exactly what they wanted. Just then, the bell above the entrance jingled softly. Marcus looked up and immediately recognized the man from the night before. The same worn coat, the same tired eyes, the same quiet expression. The homeless man stepped inside slowly. A few customers frowned the moment they saw him. Susan rolled her eyes. He's back again. Free meals attract freeloaders, Karen chuckled. Birds of a feather flocked together. Marcus felt anger rise inside him but pushed it away. He walked toward the man with a warm smile. Good morning, brother, come on in. You look like you could use some breakfast. The stranger nodded and quietly sat in the same booth. Marcus returned with eggs, toast, sausage, and fresh coffee, placing everything in front of the man without a single word about money. The stranger stared at the food before finally speaking for the first time. His voice was weak and rough. You don't even know me, Marcus smiled gently. I don't have to. The man looked confused. Aren't you afraid people will take advantage of you? Marcus laughed softly. Son, people have been taking advantage of me my whole life. That's nothing new. But I'd rather be remembered for helping somebody than for turning my back on them. Something changed in the stranger's eyes, something deeper. Almost as if those simple words had touched a wound nobody else could see. Because every act of kindness Marcus showed was answering questions the stranger had carried with him for a very long time. By Tuesday afternoon, the tension hanging over Reed's family diner had become impossible to ignore. The lunch rush Marcus used to depend on had almost disappeared. Booths that once stayed full now sat empty for hours. His electricity bill was overdue. The gas company had sent 2 warnings. His supplier called every day asking about the balance. And the bank had stopped pretending to be patient. That afternoon his phone rang. It was Raymond Foster, owner of Foster Foods, who had supplied the diner for almost 12 years. Raymond, good to hear from you. There was a long pause. Marcus, Raymond said quietly, I'm sorry, but I can't keep doing this. Marcus closed his eyes. Please don't tell me you're cutting me off. Son, you've been behind for almost 3 months. My hands are tied. The board made the decision. No more deliveries until the balance is cleared. Marcus swallowed hard. So that's it. I'm sorry. The line went dead, 12 years, and now, just like that, he was alone. His pantry was nearly empty. A few bags of rice, some onions, several cans of beans. A crate of tomatoes a local vendor had practically given him out of pity. But even then, Marcus didn't stop cooking, because hunger didn't wait for bank statements, and kindness didn't disappear just because life became difficult. Later that evening, the homeless man returned, but before Marcus could even approach him, Susan Whittaker stood up. "Enough is enough," she snapped. "You come in here every day eating free meals while hardworking people pay for theirs." The stranger lowered his eyes and said nothing. Susan turned toward Marcus. "And you? This is exactly why you're losing everything. You care more about strangers than your own business." Then she looked directly at him. "Maybe if you stopped trying to save everybody, you wouldn't be another failed black businessman." The words hung in the air like poison. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Not because he hadn't heard racist remarks before. He had, his entire life, but because hatred had become so normal that people no longer even tried to hide it. He calmly looked at her and spoke in a gentle voice. "Susan, everyone who walks through my doors deserves respect," she laughed bitterly. "Respect. You should worry about saving your restaurant." Marcus smiled sadly. "Maybe, but I'll never save it by losing who I am." Susan scoffed, grabbed her purse, and stormed out. Her friends followed. The door slammed shut. Marcus turned back toward the stranger. "Sorry about that." The man looked up. Marcus noticed something in his expression. Pain, not anger, not embarrassment. Pain. As though Susan's words had touched old memories buried deep inside him. Marcus placed a fresh plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes in front of him. "Eat while it's hot." The stranger stared at the food, then quietly asked, "Why do you do this?" Marcus smiled. "My mama used to say that people don't stop being human just because life gets hard." The stranger's eyes softened. "And what if nobody ever returns the kindness?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Then at least I know I did the right thing." Wednesday morning brought another blow. A delivery truck pulled into the parking lot, but instead of unloading, the driver stepped inside holding a clipboard. It was Tommy Jenkins, who had delivered to the diner for nearly 3 years. "Morning, Mr. Reed," Marcus frowned. "You're running late today." Tommy shifted uneasily. "Actually, sir, I don't have anything for you. Corporate made the call." "No deliveries until the balance is paid." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand." "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed." Marcus managed a tired smile. "Don't apologize for something you didn't do." Inside sat Rick Palmer, owner of Palmer Auto Sales, one of the biggest businesses in Riverside. Wealthy, arrogant, and carrying himself like a man who believed money made him better than everyone else. When he noticed the delivery truck leaving empty, a small smile appeared on his face. "Looks like the vultures are finally circling," Marcus continued, wiping the counter. Rick folded his newspaper. "When this place finally goes under, what are you planning to do, Marcus?" "Start another charity kitchen," Marcus answered calmly. "I'll figure something out," Rick laughed. "You always were an optimist." Then he spoke the words Marcus had heard his entire life. "My father used to say people should stick to what they know. Some folks just aren't meant to run businesses." Marcus looked at him quietly. "Times change, Rick." Rick smirked. "Maybe. But some changes aren't improvements." Marcus simply nodded and walked away. "What, no lecture about kindness and equality?" Rick called after him. Marcus turned slowly and smiled. "No, Rick. I learned a long time ago that hate usually says more about the person carrying it than the person receiving it." For the first time, Rick's smile disappeared. That evening, the stranger returned. As Marcus placed his plate down, the man spoke quietly. "You don't have much left, do you?" Marcus smiled. "Enough for today." "But what about tomorrow?" Marcus shrugged gently. "Tomorrow will worry about itself." The stranger studied him. "You say that like you're not afraid." Marcus let out a quiet laugh. "Oh, I'm afraid more than you know. I haven't slept properly in weeks. Every night I wonder if this place will survive. I wonder if my mother would be disappointed in me." He looked around the nearly empty diner. "But then I remember what my father used to tell me. Son, never let hard times teach you how to stop being a good man." The stranger's eyes softened. "And if being a good man costs you everything," Marcus smiled sadly, "then I guess I'll lose everything." Almost in a whisper, the stranger asked, "And you really believe that?" Marcus nodded. "I do. Thursday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky. Marcus sat alone in his office before opening. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope he had been avoiding for 2 days. The bold red letters made his stomach sink immediately. Unless payment arrangements were made, Reed's family diner would be repossessed. Marcus closed his eyes. The old photographs on the wall seemed to carry 1,000 memories. His father standing proudly beside the diner on opening day. His mother smiling in front of the grill, flour covering her apron. He whispered softly, "I'm sorry, Mama." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Dad." By noon word had spread through Riverside. Susan sat near the window with Karen. "I heard the bank finally gave him his last warning," Susan smirked. "Well, it was only a matter of time," Karen nodded. "Everybody knows he spent years giving away free meals. That's not business." "That's stupidity." Susan leaned closer. "Maybe now somebody respectable can buy this place." Neither woman bothered lowering her voice. And for the first time, a small part of Marcus wondered if they might be right. That evening, the homeless man entered and sat in booth number 7. But this time, Marcus noticed something different. The man looked concerned, almost worried. The stranger studied Marcus's face. "You look hurt." Something inside Marcus cracked. He sat down across from the stranger. "I got the final notice this morning. They're taking the diner." He laughed bitterly. "Funny thing is, I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just tired. My parents spent their whole lives building this place. My father worked 18 hours a day. My mother practically lived in that kitchen. And I promised them I'd protect what they built." His voice grew softer. "But I failed." The homeless man's expression changed immediately. "No," Marcus smiled sadly. "Feels like it." The stranger leaned forward. "If everything disappears tomorrow, would you change who you are? Would you stop helping people?" Marcus sat silently, then shook his head. "No, why not?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Because my mother raised me better than that." The homeless man's eyes glistened slightly. "And if kindness costs you everything," Marcus laughed softly. "Seems like we're about to find out." For the first time since entering the diner days earlier, the stranger smiled. Not a large smile. Just the faint smile of someone who had finally found the answer he had been searching for. Meanwhile, across town, Rick Palmer sat inside the Riverside Country Club with several businessmen. "By next week," Rick announced confidently, "that diner will be gone. I already spoke to the bank. I'm buying the property." He raised his glass proudly. "Finally, we can clean up that part of Maple Street," one of the men smirked. "And what about Reed?" Rick shrugged carelessly. "He should have known his place." Their laughter filled the room. None of them knew that fate was quietly listening. Friday morning arrived with an unusual stillness. Marcus had barely slept. He had spent hours sitting alone at the counter, staring at the faded photographs on the walls. For 30 years, Reed's family diner had been more than a business. It had been a symbol of sacrifice, love, and dignity. And now he could almost feel those memories slipping through his fingers. By mid-morning, the diner slowly filled with curious faces. Some came for food, others came to watch. The atmosphere felt strange, almost uncomfortable. Then the bell above the entrance rang softly. The homeless man entered once again. His coat remained old. His beard remained uneven, and yet something about him seemed different. His posture appeared stronger. His eyes carried a quiet confidence Marcus had never noticed before. Susan rolled her eyes immediately. Unbelievable, even on the man's last day, he's still feeding freeloaders. Rick Palmer smiled smugly. "You have to admire Marcus. He's determined to go broke with dignity." Marcus heard every word, but he lacked the energy to respond. As he placed a plate before the stranger, he forced himself to smile. "Looks like this might be the last Friday special I ever serve." The man looked up sharply. Marcus sat down across from him. "You know, growing up, people always told me I'd have to work twice as hard to earn half as much. My father heard the same thing. My grandfather heard it too. I spent my whole life trying to prove everybody wrong." His voice grew quieter, "But maybe they were right." The homeless man's expression changed immediately. "No. Never let broken people decide your value. The world has always been full of people who fear what they don't understand. Their hatred says nothing about you." Marcus studied him carefully. There was something unusual about the way he spoke, something educated, something powerful, almost as though this was not the language of a man who had spent years on the streets. But before he could ask another question, the front doors suddenly opened. Two uniformed officers entered the diner. Behind them stood a man in a gray suit carrying a clipboard. Conversation stopped instantly. Coffee cups froze halfway to people's lips. Susan exchanged excited glances with Karen. Rick Palmer sat up straighter. Marcus slowly rose to his feet. His heart sank. Before a single word was spoken, he already knew. The man with the clipboard approached the counter. "Mr. Marcus Reed?" Marcus nodded. "Yes." The man cleared his throat. "Sir, I'm afraid I have official documents regarding this property." Every eye in the diner turned toward Marcus. Smiles began appearing on certain faces. Susan could barely hide her excitement. Karen whispered, "It's finally happening." Rick leaned back and smirked. Marcus's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. He felt the weight of humiliation pressing down on him. But more than anything, he felt heartbreak, because in that moment all he could think about were his parents, everything they had built, everything they had sacrificed, everything he had promised to protect. The suited man opened his folder. And as he did, Marcus had no idea that within minutes, Maple Street would witness something nobody in Riverside would ever forget. The entire diner felt as if time had stopped. The suited man cleared his throat and spoke formally. "Mr. Marcus Reed, this property is under final repossession order due to unpaid financial obligations. You are required to vacate the premises immediately after formal documentation is completed." A faint sound of satisfaction moved through the room. Susan leaned closer to Karen. "I told you." It was only a matter of time. Rick exhaled slowly, his eyes drifting toward Marcus with quiet superiority. Marcus said nothing. He simply looked toward the old diner walls, the faded paint, the worn booths, the kitchen doorway where his mother once stood. His throat tightened. This wasn't just a building, it was his life. Then suddenly the bell above the entrance rang again, but this time the sound was different, sharp, commanding. 3 black SUVs rolled into view outside, their polished surfaces reflecting the gray sky. One by one they stopped along the curb. People outside turned their heads, conversations stopped. Even the officers exchanged uncertain glances. Rick Palmer straightened in his seat. Susan frowned. "Who is that?" she muttered. Before anyone could answer, the door of the first SUV opened. And the homeless man stepped out, but he was no longer homeless. The worn coat was gone. In its place was a perfectly tailored black suit. His beard was trimmed. His posture was straight. The tired, broken expression that once defined him had disappeared completely. In his place stood a man whose presence alone changed the atmosphere of the entire street. He walked forward slowly, not rushing, not hesitating, as if every step had been planned long before this moment arrived. Behind him, 2 assistants followed carrying leather folders. The entire diner went silent. Susan's smile faded instantly. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Rick Palmer's expression stiffened for the first time. Marcus stared. His mind refused to process what he was seeing. The man in the black suit stopped directly in front of Marcus. Neither spoke. The silence was heavy. Finally, the man spoke in a calm, controlled voice. "Mr. Reed," Marcus swallowed hard. "Do I know you?" Something close to respect crossed the man's face. "No," he replied softly, "but I know you." He placed a thick folder on the counter. The sound echoed through the diner like a hammer. "This diner, this property, and everything surrounding it," he paused, "belongs to you." Marcus blinked. "What?" The man turned toward the officers. "Remove your documents." The officer hesitated. "Sir, we are under official." The man raised one hand slightly. His voice remained calm but carried undeniable authority. "I said remove them." The officer slowly stepped back. Susan Whittaker stood up. "What is going on here?" Rick Palmer narrowed his eyes. "Who exactly are you?" The man turned slowly toward them. "My name is Daniel Brooks." Nobody recognized the name at first. Then one of the assistants stepped forward and added quietly, "Founder and CEO of Brooks International Holdings." The words hit the room like a shockwave. Even Rick Palmer went completely still. Susan's face lost all color. Daniel continued, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "I have been observing this diner for weeks, not as a homeless man, but as a test. I wanted to see what kind of man you really are when no one is watching, when nothing benefits you, when the world gives you nothing in return." His voice softened. "And you kept giving. Even when it cost you everything." He opened the folder and placed it gently on the counter. Every debt, every obligation, every claim against this property has been paid in full. Marcus stared at the papers. His hands trembled. No, this isn't real. Daniel nodded. It is. And not only that, this diner is now fully yours, legally, permanently, and debt-free. A wave of shock moved through the room. Susan sat back down slowly. Corinne whispered, "This can't be happening." Rick Palmer clenched his jaw. Daniel continued, "But there is more." Marcus looked up slowly. "I am expanding your diner into a national chain. And I want you to lead it." Silence hit again. Marcus shook his head. "I don't understand. Why me?" Daniel looked at him steadily. "Because in a world full of people who calculate profit, you chose humanity, and that is something money cannot buy." Marcus felt his eyes burn. The room that had mocked him moments earlier now stood frozen in disbelief. Susan couldn't speak. Rick Palmer looked like a man watching his entire belief system collapse. And Marcus Reed, the man they had called foolish, weak, and naive, now stood at the center of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The diner remained frozen in silence long after Daniel finished speaking. Marcus stood behind the counter staring at the documents. Debt cleared, ownership transferred, expansion rights approved. Everything he had spent months fearing had been erased in minutes. But what unsettled him most was not the money, it was the truth behind it. He slowly raised his eyes toward Daniel. "You were never homeless." Daniel nodded calmly. "No, I needed to see who you were when nothing was offered to you in return, not your reputation, not your success. Just you." Marcus looked down, trying to process everything. The nights he had served soup with no questions. The mornings he had given coffee without judgment. The countless times he had absorbed the insults in silence. All of it had been observed, recorded, measured. Rick finally stood up, trying to regain control. "This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and change everything." Daniel turned his gaze toward him slowly. "I didn't change anything," he replied. "I simply revealed it." Rick scoffed, but his voice lacked strength. "This town has rules. Business doesn't work like—" Daniel interrupted gently but firmly. "No, this town had assumptions. And assumptions are not rules." A few customers lowered their heads. No one defended Rick. No one agreed with him either. Daniel turned back toward Marcus. "I didn't choose you because you were successful. I chose you because you were kind when kindness had no reward." Marcus swallowed hard. "And what happens now?" Daniel's expression softened. "Now you stop surviving and start building. This diner will be the first location of a national project. Every store will follow the same principle you already lived by. No one is denied food, no one is judged. And no one is turned away because of how they look or what they have." Marcus shook his head slowly. "That's too big for me." Daniel's reply was immediate. "No, it's exactly right for you." One by one, the same people who had mocked Marcus began feeling something uncomfortable rising inside them. Not anger, not disbelief, shame. Susan's voice broke the silence, but it was no longer sharp. I didn't mean it like that." No one responded. Corinne whispered quietly, almost to herself. "We didn't think it would actually go this far." Marcus looked at them for a long moment. For years, these had been the same faces that dismissed him, questioned him, reduced him. And now they were finally seeing him differently, not because he had changed, but because the truth had been revealed. He exhaled slowly. "I never asked for anyone to believe in me," he said softly. "I just didn't want anyone to go hungry." Daniel stepped toward the door. "Outside." Everyone slowly followed his gaze. Through the glass windows, the street of Riverside had gathered. People stood outside confused, whispering, trying to understand the black SUVs parked along the curb. Daniel opened the door. Cool air entered the room. He stepped outside, and Marcus followed. The crowd turned toward them. Daniel spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "For years, this man fed people you ignored. He helped those you walked past. He gave when no one else would. And today you almost watched him lose everything because you assumed his kindness was weakness." No one spoke. Daniel's voice remained steady. "Let this be clear to everyone here. This man is not a failure. He is the foundation of what this community should have been all along." He turned one final time toward Marcus. "And you," he said gently, "never stop being who you are." Then, just as suddenly as he had arrived, Daniel walked back toward the SUV. The engines started. One by one, the black vehicles pulled away from Riverside. leaving behind a street full of stunned silence and changed perspectives. Inside the diner, Marcus stood alone for a moment. Then slowly he walked back inside and looked around. The same booths, the same counter, the same worn floor, but everything felt different now, not because the diner had changed, but because the truth had finally entered it. A few days later, Reed's family diner reopened, and this time the sign outside didn't just represent a restaurant, it represented a promise. A promise that no matter who you were, where you came from, or what you had lost, there would always be a place for you at Marcus Reed's table. And slowly, even those who once mocked him began to return, not as critics, but as people willing to eat, listen, and remember. Because sometimes the world doesn't reward kindness immediately. But when it does return, it returns in ways no one ever forgets. Marcus Reed's story reminds us that true strength is not measured by money, status, or approval, but by how you treat others when you have every reason not to. Now we want to ask you, if you were in Marcus's place, would you still choose kindness, even if no one appreciated it at first? Tell us in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the biggest reason for someone else's life to change.